So now that we've gotten really good at placing images and getting stuff into Photoshop, let's actually talk about the Photoshop interface a little bit. This might seem like sort of a dry topic, but it's really important to understand everything that's going on the screen. So first I want to start with the very top bar where it says Photoshop CC, File, Edit, Image, etc. These are different menus, and just like Word or PowerPoint or any of those, they have various tools within them. Most of the things that are within these menus can also be found on the sidebar or in other hidden menus within Photoshop. Now on Windows, this will be integrated into the actual title bar of the program, but this is just how Mac works. It's a little bit different. So most importantly, we have the File menu where we can create a new document, open an old document, and do some other things. Directly below that, we have the Tool Options bar. Now this is the bar we were using whenever we were transforming before, right? We were changing values in this. This is a context-sensitive toolbar which changes based on which tool you're using. So whenever I was in transform mode, it gives me transformation tools. Whenever I hit return or accept the transformation, it changes to a different set of tool options. This bar is really important, and often a lot of beginners forget about this bar because they get so wrapped up in the toolbar on the left-hand side. So this changes based on the tool that you're using. On the left-hand side, we have the actual toolbar. So this is our kind of tool chest. And each of these represent a different function within Photoshop. If you highlight them with your mouse, you just hold your mouse over it, it'll show you a little video of how they work. This is a fairly new feature, so if you're using an older version of Photoshop, you won't see this. So for example, this top tool is the Move tool, which allows us to click and drag and move things around. Notice that my top options bar changes based on the tool that I'm using. So I'm using the Move tool, and it says, here's the Move tool right here, and here's some options. Below that, we have the Rectangular Marquee tool. So you notice whenever I clicked it to select it, changed the tool option to Rectangular Marquee, and some of these options change. This is a selection tool. I'm going to go back to the Move tool and talk about shelves. Almost all of these tools, and in fact I believe all of them, except for maybe the Zoom tool, have this little tiny arrow in the corner. What this means is if I click and hold on the tool, so rather than just clicking to select it, I click and hold, it's going to show me other tools that are hidden by that tool. So for example, we were using the Rectangular Marquee tool just a second ago. Whenever I click and hold on it, it changes to the Elliptical Marquee tool, the Single Row Marquee tool, and the Single Column Marquee tool. Likewise, the Brush tool. This is where we find the Pencil tool, Color Replacement Brush, Mixer Brush, etc. They group similar tools together within Photoshop. This is really important because if you ever see me using a tool, like for instance I'm using the Paint Bucket tool here, you might look at your interface and say, well, I don't have the paint bucket. Always pay attention to where it is on the toolbar. It'll be hidden within something else. So for instance, the Gradient tool hides the Paint Bucket tool. And again, I'm getting to that just by clicking and holding and then selecting my tool. In the center, we have our viewport where we actually can make edits and click and drag stuff around. Above that, we have our document tabs. So our first document, it's at 100%. That means it's zoomed in 100%. Gives us a name of the layer that we're on. I'll talk a little bit about layers later. The color mode, which I mentioned in the first video, RGB, and it's 8-bit color. It's not too important to know. This little asterisk, though, is important. That means that this document hasn't been saved yet. It hasn't been saved since we made changes. So I'll talk more about saving in a later video, but if I save this, that asterisk goes away until I make a change. Once I make a change, that asterisk reappears. It'll ask me to save, basically. So it's telling me, hey, you made a change, you might want to save. We're going to be saving a lot in this class, so keep that in mind. Whenever we have multiple documents open, there'll be different tabs, kind of like your tabs in Chrome or another browser that you might use. So for example, if I open up this landscape image, it's a different tab within Photoshop. I can close a tab just by clicking the X. Down here at the bottom, we have some data about how large our document is and if we're zoomed in or not. So it's at 100% view right now, so we're viewing this at 100%. If we were zoomed in, I'll talk about the zoom tools a little bit later, it'll change based on how zoomed in we are. Go ahead and zoom back out to 100%. Now right here on the right-hand side, we have our first tool shelf that has the history button on it. This is a button that shows us all of the actions that we've taken. To the right of that, I have a color tab where I can pick a different color. I have a swatches tab, which lets me select different color swatches. Below that, I have the properties tab, which shows me the properties of what I currently have selected. An adjustments panel. Notice these are tabbed. The adjustments panel, which lets me make adjustments. Below that, I have the layers panel, the channels panel, and the paths panel. Finally, to the far right, I have the libraries panel. So this is the Photoshop Essentials view. Basically, this is the default view in Photoshop. If you don't see what I see, I'm going to show you a little trick. If we go up to the top and we click Window, Workspace, Essentials. If it still doesn't look the same, you can go Workspace, Reset Essentials, then I'll go back to what it defaults. Now, workspaces are basically different layouts that we can use. So if I'm on graphic and web, notice it looks a little bit different. Photography, painting. I'll go back to Essentials. The Essentials view is what you'll typically see in most tutorials on the internet and within the first few tutorials that we've looked at, but you're more than welcome to customize your interface to suit your needs. If I go to Windows, Workspace, create a new workspace, I can call it, for instance, I'll call it Cameron's Workspace, and we'll say save. So now I'm in the Cameron's Workspace rather than the Essentials Workspace. Any changes I make are going to be saved to this workspace. This interface is fully customizable. So for instance, this Libraries tab, we are never going to use this in this class. It's just taking up screen real estate. I can either click this little box right here, these 3 lines, or multiple lines, and I can click Close. And that closes whatever tab is selected. So for instance, I'm not going to use color. I'm not going to use swatches. Let's move properties to a different area. So I can drag and move this around to wherever I'd like it to be. So I could leave it floating. I could drag it over to a different area. See how it fills in these little blue zones. I could drop it onto an existing shelf. So right here, if I hold it, I can drop it here. I can also pull that off. So some people like to view their history. If I double click the name, it'll collapse it. So I can double click adjustments and layers. If I double click it again, it'll uncollapse it. And let's say, just like how I just deleted the Properties tab, here I'll delete this History tab too. Let's say I want to get that back. What's the best way to do that? Well, if I go to the Window menu, I can go down to Properties. It'll come back. I can kind of toss it in here. I like these little buttons personally. So I'm going to make a couple other windows that I use commonly. The adjustments window right here, I'm actually going to grab that and drop it onto that bar. I'm not going to be using paths at all, so I'll close that tab. I'm not really going to be using channels at all either. I'm definitely going to be using layers. Let's see what else we want to use. Let's grab the color tab again, and I'm going to toss this on our little bar. Let's do the histogram. This is used in photography. I'll pull that off. The navigator, I like to use the navigator actually. I'll toss that above here. The navigator basically lets you zoom in and move around your document. And then histogram, I'm going to just toss on this bar. This is a sort of data metric that I like to use. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is you can customize this however you like. You could have really expanded shelves. You could have really collapsed shelves. You could have a very minimalist interface. You could have a very active interface. It's totally up to you and whatever you'd like to do. We've covered pretty much every aspect of the interface in Photoshop, but just as a reminder, if we ever want to revert back to how we used to be, we can go to Window, Workspace, Essentials, and if it doesn't look good, we can go to Workspace, Reset Essentials, and that'll reset it to how it was originally.